As Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrives in Washington, his meeting with US President Donald Trump takes on historic weight. Just days earlier, Trump met Vladimir Putin in Alaska and dropped his demand for a ceasefire, instead backing a plan that would see Ukraine ceding territories and abandon NATO ambitions in exchange for lasting peace. Now Zelensky, joined by Europe's top leaders, faces the challenge of securing lasting peace without territorial concessions. Trump says Ukraine can end the war immediately, while Zelensky insists peace must be strong and permanent. Will Trump's deal-making approach bring real peace, or will Ukraine be pushed into concessions? How united will the European leaders remain as they gather in Washington? And what security guarantees, if any, can truly protect Ukraine's future? I'm Henny Saif. Let's go in depth. According to The Guardian, Trump has intensified pressure on Zelensky ahead of high-stakes talks in Washington with European leaders. On his Truth Social platform, Trump declared that Zelensky could end the war almost immediately if he abandoned Ukraine's NATO ambitions and accepted that Crimea would remain under Russian control. The remarks sparked concern in Europe that Trump may press Kyiv into concessions favorable to Moscow, particularly after his Alaska summit with Vladimir Putin, which was widely viewed as a victory for Russia. Zelensky, arriving in Washington, emphasized the need for lasting and reliable peace and expressed hope that joint US and European strength would compel Moscow to negotiate seriously. European leaders, including Britain's Keir Starmer and France's Emmanuel Macron, are expected to reaffirm support for Ukraine's territorial integrity while rejecting any land swap settlement, according to The Guardian. Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, suggested Putin agreed to NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine as part of a possible deal. The Washington Post has reported that Zelensky arrived in Washington with a powerful delegation of European leaders, aiming to present a united front to Trump against Russia. The unusual gathering featuring leaders from France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Finland, the EU and NATO reflects European concern that Trump, after his Alaska summit with Putin, might pressure Ukraine into concessions. European leaders excluded from Trump's Putin talks hope to prevent a repeat of Zelensky's Oval Office visit in February, when Trump chastised him for not showing enough gratitude for American military aid. On the agenda are potential NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine. The meeting could prove pivotal for both Ukraine's future and the transatlantic alliance, according to the Washington Post.
In Washington, a critical meeting is underway between U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and a number of European leaders. This rare gathering follows Trump's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, where Trump dropped his demand for a ceasefire and instead endorsed Putin's proposal for a sweeping peace deal. Trump insists Ukraine must cede Crimea, give up NATO membership, and negotiate over the Donbas region. On his social media, Trump declared that Zelensky can end the war almost immediately if he wants to. Zelensky, arriving in Washington, rejected the idea of surrendering land and called for a lasting peace. European leaders, including France's Emmanuel Macron, Germany's Friedrich Merz, Britain's Keir Starmer, and Italy's Giorgia Meloni, traveled to Washington in a rare show of unity. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen are joining the meeting. Their presence highlights deep concern that Trump may pressure Zelensky into a deal that does not align with Europe's priorities. The talks in Washington mark a decisive moment in efforts to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Whether they lead to a genuine security guarantees and a durable peace, or to fragile compromises that risk future instability, remains an open question.
For more analysis, we are joined from Washington by Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Global Foreign Policy Center Executive Director, and from Kyiv by Mr. Oleksiy Milnik, the former Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister. Gentlemen, welcome to In Depth. Mr. Russell, after meeting Putin in Alaska, Trump dropped his demand for a ceasefire. Now, from an American perspective, what does this say about Trump's broader foreign policy approach?
Well, it shows the transactional fluidity, Haney, of the Trump foreign policy when it relates to particularly areas in conflict. It's wherever the wind's blowing and wherever it best meets his goals, that's where it will land. We've seen it we've gone like almost full circle from the Oval Office debacle. That was the meeting with Zelensky and Vice President J.D. Vance, who, by the way, is probably going to be in the room today. And then we've gone to being Kyiv's best friend and regaining the support of Washington in their fight against the illegal invasion by Moscow, to now, Trump's basically looking to get his place in history and possibly a Nobel Peace Prize, but at the expense of Ukrainian sovereignty, Ukrainian dignity, and at the possibility of alienating all of our NATO allies who are showing up in Washington today.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Milnik, Zelensky has firmly rejected ceding Crimea or Donbass. How do you think Kyiv views Trump's insistence that these concessions are necessary for peace? Do you feel that Zelensky will be convinced by Trump's approach or insistence, or will Trump change his mind?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I think that Ukraine now feels like seeing an attempt to betray Ukraine by the White House, by President Trump personally. And you mentioned the infamous February 28th meeting in Oval Office. The demand at that time for Ukraine was for President Zelensky to agree to unconditional ceasefire. That caused this argument, the conflict. Now, President Zelensky accepted the offer, and we have almost 6 months after, we have another offer, which is to surrender Ukrainian land. But if at that time it was not partly acceptable for Ukraine, the ceasefire. Now, this demand of surrendering Ukrainian territory controlled by Ukrainian government is the red line for Ukraine. And it's about legal requirements, like Ukrainian constitution forbids to change state borders without public referendum. And it's also the attitude of Ukrainian people. It will not be accepted even if President Zelensky is forced to sign any kind of paper. It's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Russell, Zelensky's visit comes months after the tense Oval Office clash where Trump accused him of gambling with World War III. How repaired is their relationship now? How do you expect this meeting will go?
It's a great question, Haney. And the thing about it is it's hard to really tell. We saw a large amount of support after Vladimir Putin was defying Trump's call for a ceasefire before the meeting in Alaska last week. So we kind of thought that there had been large-scale repairs to the relationship and the support. After Friday, and starting to see what President Trump has put out on his social media feeds and what he's put out public comment-wise, is starting to lead us to believe that, Vladimir Putin might have convinced him of certain aspects, include putting pressure on Zelensky to just say Crimea is gone forever, and you're probably going to have to accept the fact that the Donbass are going to go. That's how you're going to get a peace deal, and I think that's where the pressure is going to come from. The fear moving forward, Haney, is that that's going to irrevocably put damage on the relationship between Kyiv and Washington. If we put too much hard pressure on Zelensky signing over the Donbass, which is a kind of working agreement right now, that's a problem. That's going to cause a problem.
Well, Mr. Milnik, do you think that that's why leaders of France, Germany, Britain and Italy are joining Zelensky in Washington? How important is this European presence then for Ukraine's position? Is their presence guaranteeing that this meeting would not have the similar outcome from the previous Oval Office meeting between Trump and Zelensky?
Look, the team of the European leaders, I mean, heads of the governments, and the main officials of the European Union and NATO, they are very busy people, and they have plenty of things to do at home. And why do they go all to Washington, D.C. for such a long trip? It is not simply to show the solidarity with Ukraine, which is not a part of a member of the European Union, neither of NATO. The main reason is that this is about the European security. This is about the Euro-Atlantic security. This is about the future of the continent, and this is about the future of, it's about the world order. And if someone is gambling with the World War III, this someone is in the Washington, D.C. And that's why I think the European leaders put aside all the important business at home and go to the Washington, D.C., because this is not just Ukrainian, this is the European security matter.
Mr. Russell, now many of these European leaders accompany Zelensky to Washington. They're fearing Trump may attempt to pressure Ukraine. Does this indicate waning trust between Europe and the U.S.? Do you agree with Mr. Milnik that the person who's really gambling with World War III sits in Washington?
I wouldn't go so far as to say he's gambling with World War III, but it definitely makes things much more tense. In that instance, I do agree with my colleague, the good minister in Kyiv. Look, let's be clear about this. The White House has portrayed the Alaska conference, the Alaska Putin meeting, as historic. You want to talk about historic? You are talking about the heads of state of our three biggest allies in NATO and the Secretary General of NATO and the EU president all showing up in unity in favor of supporting the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian sovereignty, and Ukrainian security. This is historic. This is going to be a pivotal milestone, in my opinion, that shows that either the U.S. and NATO stand firm with each other and are able to stand lock arm in promoting democracy and law and order on the European continent and push back on Vladimir Putin's aggression and illegal wars, no matter how he wants to portray it to Donald Trump. This is historic in the fact that there is one voice, one unified mission, one unified message coming to Washington from the heads of state in one city saying this has to be a unified message of securing Ukrainian sovereignty. We cannot reward or allow Putin to benefit from his brutish, illegal actions on the European continent. That's the big story coming out of Washington today.
Mr. Milnik, now Trump said that Zelensky needs to forget about, or NATO, or Ukraine needs to forget about joining NATO. However, the US is considering NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine. How does Ukraine see this offer?
First of all, talking about Trump's position regarding Ukraine's possible NATO membership, Trump is not forever. And if we talk about this possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year. And it's ridiculous when we hear about these proposals about the security guarantees. And actually, it's not about NATO security guarantees. It's about Article 5 language. And I'm afraid that very few people have read, even those officials that made such offer, have read carefully the language of the Article 5, which has at the very end, it has a sentence like what they consider necessary. So this mutual collective obligation is again at the discretion of the governments. So they can provide support immediately, they can provide weapons, soldiers, etc., if they consider necessary, or they will provide some blankets if they consider necessary. So this is about the language. It's not about the sort or the level of security guarantees. It's about just the language used in the Article 5. Moreover, if you look at the so-called Tashkent Treaty, which the the military alliance headed by Russia, they have exactly the same language, the same wording. And ask Armenia, ask other like Kazakhstan, what kind of security guarantees they got from Russia by having the same language, the same article in their security treaty. So that it is not reliable, it's not credible, especially when you expect any security guarantees from the Russian Federation, which violated a dozen of international agreements and bilateral agreements with Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Russell, the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff suggested the NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine, but how realistic is it for Washington to commit to Article 5 style obligations outside of NATO?
Hey, that's a loaded question. The reality is, would the commitment of the U.S. and will the U.S. abide by it are two completely different scenarios. We've talked about and we've seen this back and forth regarding Ukraine being part of NATO, and apparently, according to Trump today, that's just not going to be a possibility. Is it going to be that way forever? No. Do I foresee Ukraine possibly becoming a part of NATO? Absolutely. Just not under a Trump administration. What we have to realize is these security guarantees are only as good as the people backing them, as the heads of state of the member nations of that treaty or that agreement stand by them. We've seen ceasefires with Vladimir Putin, and they mean nothing to him. For crying out loud, he was bombing the Donetsk region while he was on the ground trying to secure a deal for peace with Trump. It's a matter of who will stand by their word, stand by the agreement, and even on our side. Crimea, we gave away Crimea, which wasn't ours to give away, but in 2014 when we did that, that was that kind of smacked of some sort of backroom deal, and we still probably regret that move today. There's a lot of factors in here, and there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of talk. It's only when the people who put it in place back them up with actions, not words, that these become effective. And we've seen this historically in the region.
Mr. Milnik, now after the previous fallout between Trump and Zelensky that was later reconciled after signing the minerals deal, how could that affect today's meeting, and do you feel that maybe a similar deal could be made for Trump to abandon his suggestion of land or territory concessions?
Yeah, you are right that Ukraine agreed to the mineral deal, but there was a very tough discussion around this so-called mineral deal, because actually the American offer was so kind that it looked exactly like Putin's offer. Like Ukraine was supposed to give or to hand over the right for Ukrainian minerals and nothing in return from the United States. There was a tough discussion, and finally two sides came to a kind of mutually beneficial agreement. But since then, I can hardly remember any case that when President Trump mentioned the disagreement. So I assume that he lost already interest to that agreement. Now, I think we are not returning back to the situation of February this year, but somewhere in between. And I don't think that President Trump has enough even power or instrument to force Ukraine into these unacceptable concessions nowadays.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Russell, Trump did not impose new sanctions on Moscow despite previous threats. Why do you think he refrained from imposing such sanctions?
Honestly, in my opinion, I think he succumbed to the Putin-Trump, the Putin charm. Aggressiveness. It's not a secret here in Washington that Trump has kind of had this affinity for Vladimir Putin, the authoritarian rule that he has over Russia. Trump would love something like that, and he respects Putin for that. He thinks that they're great friends, and I think that the charm offensive worked on him. I think the bigger damage isn't that the deal didn't come out. It was that Putin may have convinced Donald Trump of the legitimacy of Russia's actions in Ukraine. That's a bigger threat right now, and I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing the show of force and the unified delegation coming from Europe on today's meeting regarding Ukraine. That's the bigger threat. The secondary sanctions are going to come and go. Their effectiveness could be possible. We have the effects of the BRICS alliance that may offset that. There's a lot of factors in here. The biggest fear should be the charm offensive and the Jedi mind tricks that Vladimir Putin may have worked on Donald Trump last Friday.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Milnik, Zelensky says peace must be lasting and not just another fragile pause. Now, you've mentioned that Trump's not going to stay there forever, and Zelensky won't be staying there forever. So what conditions would Ukrainians consider necessary for a truly durable peace?
As for the moment, it looks like Ukraine is ready to accept an unconditional ceasefire and to start peace negotiations let's say, its frozen conflict along the existing front lines. Ukraine will not legally recognize Russian rights to control over the occupied or illegally annexed Ukrainian territories, including Crimea. And Ukraine is ready to discuss a format of future relations like peaceful coexistence with Russia, of course, with the reliable security guarantees. And also, might be interesting for you what is our vision for the future security guarantees, because we are absolutely sure that the most reliable security guarantees is the strong Ukrainian defense deterrence capabilities and our partnership solidarity with the European partners. This is what we see as the most reliable model for now and for the nearest future.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Russell, the US already has economic stakes in Ukraine through the minerals and arms deals. How much do business interests shape Trump's diplomacy here? Should we really be expecting more deals to be done to please Ukraine, please the US, and maybe also does not anger Russia?
Wow. That's also a very deep question. I think if we start looking at the diplomacy that's being done surrounding a Ukrainian peace deal as transactional, that does not help global security in this instance because we have a unreigned aggressor in Russia, in Vladimir Putin. If we start looking at this as a real estate transaction and not as geopolitical and international security, that becomes an issue. That also takes away from some of the credibility of some of the peace deals as far as them being long lasting. The reality is that the U.S. has some interest in the minerals rights, and it would benefit certain economic sectors here in the United States and in the West maintaining those mineral rights. But I would caution, I would strongly caution about looking at this from a traditional boardroom real estate transactional viewpoint of let's make a deal rather than how do we ensure the safety and security of a sovereign country and its citizens from continued illegal and unwarranted aggression by a neighbor.
Mr. Milnik, if Washington and Europe push Ukraine towards compromise, will this fracture the unity between Kyiv and its European allies, or will Zelensky be able to resist the pressure?
I'm quite surprised that you asking this question. That it looks like you consider a scenario when the European partners will join, to some extent, will join Trump's or Washington's demands.
No, we're trying to consider all sorts of scenarios, sir.
Yeah, I see. But as we discussed from the beginning, the purpose, the main purpose, the main goal that European leaders came to Washington, D.C. today is to oppose this pressure from Washington, D.C. And it is not about like different vision of how to establish peace and how to end the Russian aggression. It's about clear understanding that if Russia is given what Putin is asking, it's not going to be the end of the war. It's going to be just another bigger stage of the war. And that's why I simply rule out this scenario that the European leaders will change the side and join Donald Trump in pressing Ukraine into, I repeat, unacceptable concessions.
Yes. Well, Mr. Russell, now considering the other sort of scenarios where the European leaders do emphasize Ukraine's territorial integrity, while Trump clearly appears open to the land for peace ideas, could this create a rift between Washington and Europe? And how might Ukraine then navigate that situation?
Well, I think it's going to solidify the EU partners that we have here in the United States with the Ukrainian side. This could put a severe damage on the relationship of the Trump administration with NATO and our European powers, our European partners, rather. I think what we're apt to see is, and what I hope happens, is that when you have Keir Starmer, Macron, Merz, and the NATO Secretary General, all of which, well, three of the four that I mentioned, Trump has a lot of respect and likes. If they come in and they're saying, look, this is not negotiable, this is not going to be easy, but we are standing firm in our alliance, because if we don't, NATO is next. We look at Poland, we look at the Baltic states. This is a lot more serious, and I think this is a lot more unifying for EU to back Ukraine than it is for EU and NATO trying to protect its relationship with Donald Trump.
Yes, Mr. Justin Thomas Russell, the Global Foreign Policy Center Executive Director, and Mr. Oleksiy Milnik, the former Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Only a few hours separate us from the very much anticipated meeting between President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, along with other European leaders. And by this, we come to the end of this episode of In Depth. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.